In the heart of Alaska, where the biting cold could steal your breath in seconds, something happened that no one could have predicted. Imagine standing on the edge of a frozen lake, the snow falling softly around you, your feet crunching on the brittle ice as you take cautious steps forward. Now imagine that beneath that icy surface, danger lurked closer than you ever thought possible. This is not just another story about survival in the wilderness. This is the story of Mike, and what one bear did next will challenge everything you thought you knew about nature. Mike wasn't new to Alaska. After years of city life, he had chosen solitude over noise, exchanging skyscrapers for towering pines and crowded subways for the endless silence of snow-covered forests. His small cabin near Nome was miles from the nearest neighbor. It was just him, the wild, and a daily struggle to adapt to an environment that didn't forgive mistakes. That morning had started like any other. Mike brewed his coffee, wrapped himself in layer after layer of thermal clothing, and stepped outside to feel the cold sting his face. The thermometer read -38 degrees Celsius, not unusual for late January. The sun barely rose, casting a bluish glow over the landscape for just a few hours a day before sinking back below the horizon. But then came the sound, a low, echoing crack, faint at first, then louder. It wasn't the sound of shifting ice or falling snow. It was something else, something alive. Curious and cautious, Mike grabbed his heavy winter boots and headed towards the lake, the sound guiding him like an invisible thread. As he approached, the air grew still. His breath formed thick clouds as he exhaled. The lake, usually a solid sheet of ice this time of year, showed dark patches near the center. Instinct told him to stop. But curiosity, that unstoppable human instinct, pushed him forward. One more step. That was all it took. The ground beneath him gave way with a violent crack. In an instant, Mike plunged into the freezing water. The shock was indescribable. It wasn't just cold. It was like being stabbed by 1,000 needles all at once. Every muscle seized. His lungs struggled to suck in air. The instinct to breathe fought against the instinct to survive. He kicked. He clawed at the jagged edges of ice, but the more he struggled, the more the ice broke away, leaving him with nothing to grab onto. The cold was relentless, wrapping around him like chains. His heart pounded wildly, but each beat felt weaker than the last. In those terrifying seconds, flashes of memory surged through his mind. His family back home, friends he hadn't called in months, the quiet moments he had enjoyed watching the northern lights dance across the sky. Was this how it would all end? Alone, swallowed by the freezing dark? And then, from the corner of his blurred, frost-covered vision, movement. A figure, large, powerful, and unmistakably, a bear. But this was just the beginning. For weeks before that day, Mike had felt the creeping isolation sinking deeper into his bones. Life in Nome wasn't glamorous. It was raw, untamed, and merciless. The nearest store was nearly 30 miles away, and the closest human face, aside from his reflection in the frost-covered mirror, was a radio operator named Tom who lived 2 ridges over. The winters here were long, stretching across months like an endless white curtain that refused to lift. Mike's cabin, a small wooden structure built decades ago by trappers, sat nestled at the edge of a dense spruce forest. The walls were lined with old maps, some yellowed and curling at the edges. On the shelves, books about survival, photography, and Alaskan wildlife sat covered in dust. Each morning, Mike would sit by the narrow window with a cup of bitter black coffee, staring at the frozen landscape, waiting for some sign of life. On most days, there was nothing but wind and snow. His connection with nature was complex. On one hand, he admired its beauty, the towering mountains, the dancing auroras, the way the ice cracked like thunder late at night. On the other, he respected its power. He knew stories of hunters who didn't make it back, of explorers found frozen, eyes open in eternal terror, of animals both majestic and deadly. That winter, temperatures had plummeted faster than in years past. Locals talked about it over crackling radio channels. 45 degree was becoming the new normal. The lakes froze deeper, the air became thinner, and the wildlife grew desperate. Food was scarce. Sightings of bears near human shelters became more frequent. But for Mike, those stories had always felt like distant warnings. Until now. On the morning of the accident, Mike had been restless. He hadn't slept much the night before. Something felt off. Even his dog, a loyal Malamute named Bear, had refused to leave the porch, staring into the distance as if sensing something Mike couldn't see. The forest, usually filled with distant howls and rustling branches, had gone unusually silent. As he put on his layers that morning, Mike glanced at the old photograph pinned to the wall, his parents smiling under the summer sun back in Oregon. He hadn't called them in months. The last time he spoke to his mother, she had begged him to come back home. "You're pushing yourself too far," she had said. "It's not worth risking your life." But Mike felt tied to this land. It was as if the wilderness itself was part of him now, its dangers and beauty woven into his skin like frostbite scars that never truly healed. He had plans that day: gather more firewood, check the fishing lines he'd left by the lake days earlier, and maybe, if the weather permitted, hike to the next ridge for clearer photos of the ice fields. Photography was more than a hobby for him. It was his therapy, a way to capture the fleeting moments of life in a place where tomorrow was never guaranteed. But none of those plans included falling through ice. As he walked toward the lake that morning, the snow crunched beneath his boots like brittle glass. The air smelled metallic, sharp and clean, almost too clean. The sun, barely visible on the horizon, cast long, cold shadows across the landscape. Tiny flakes of snow floated down, catching the light like falling stars. He reached the lake's edge, noticing the strange discoloration in the ice near the center. Dark patches. Unnatural. Dangerous. Mike hesitated. Common sense told him to stay back. But curiosity, that relentless force, pushed him forward. One more step, and the world gave way beneath him. Now, as the freezing water swallowed him whole, Mike's mind reeled with the cruel irony. The landscape he loved so fiercely was now the very thing trying to claim his life. While struggling to find a grip on the ice, adrenaline surged through his veins, giving him bursts of energy, but they were short-lived. His hands, already numb, failed to pull him up. His thick winter jacket, now waterlogged, felt like it weighed a ton. Breathing became a conscious fight. The sounds around him muffled. The world turned into a dull echo of splashing water and cracking ice. It was then that his mind went blank for a second, surrendering to the cold. Suddenly, breaking through that heavy silence, footsteps, heavy, slow, deliberate, snow shifting under massive paws. Mike turned his head with the last strength he had and saw it, towering over him, a female brown bear, large with a thick coat matted from the snow, her breath steaming in the frigid air. Two smaller shapes lingered a few feet behind her, two cubs, their eyes wide, filled with both fear and curiosity. Mike's instincts screamed at him to fear the bear, but there was no energy left to run, no strength left to scream. All he could do was watch as the animal moved closer, her head lowering, sniffing the air. It was in that terrifying, surreal moment that something remarkable began to unfold. But before I tell you what she did next, if you've ever felt moved by stories of survival and human-animal connection, now is the perfect time to subscribe to this channel. We bring real, heart-stirring stories like this one every week. Join us so you don't miss what happens next. Mike's body trembled uncontrollably as the cold invaded every cell of his being. Every breath burned, each second dragging him closer to unconsciousness. The weight of the waterlogged clothes pulled him downward, and his hands, numb and useless, slipped helplessly off the jagged edge of the ice each time he tried to pull himself up. In that frozen moment between life and death, instinct took over. Not the human instinct for survival, but something more primal. The will to live. The refusal to let go. He forced himself to kick harder, to stretch his arms wider, desperately seeking something solid to hold on to. But the ice betrayed him every time, cracking and splintering further out with each frantic movement. The bear moved closer, her heavy steps pressed deep into the snow. She stopped just feet away from the hole where Mike struggled, tilting her head, observing him with what seemed like curiosity, or something else. Mike couldn't tell. The pounding of his heart, the deafening rush of blood in his ears, and the blinding sting of the icy water blurred his senses. But even in that state, one thought pierced through the chaos. She wasn't leaving. The bear let out a low, guttural sound. Not a growl of aggression, but something softer, almost hesitant. Her cubs, small and trembling, stayed back, shifting nervously from side to side, watching their mother with wide, alert eyes. Time warped. Seconds felt like minutes. Mike's vision tunneled. Dots of black danced at the edges of his sight. His head dipped below the surface for a terrifying few moments. The water rushed into his nose and throat, making him gag and cough violently as he resurfaced. The pain was unbearable now, like thousands of needles piercing him all at once. His limbs refused to cooperate, and still, she stayed. The bear lowered her massive head, inching closer to the hole. Mike could see the frost clinging to the fur around her snout, the icicles forming at the edges of her whiskers. Her dark eyes, deep and intelligent, locked onto his. There was no fear in them, no rage, just focus. What was she thinking? Was this predator instinct? Curiosity? Or something more? Something no biologist, no wildlife expert could ever explain? Suddenly, she stretched out one massive paw toward him. Mike flinched, expecting claws, expecting pain. But what happened next defied everything he understood about wild animals. With surprising gentleness, the bear pressed her paw against the ice near the edge of the hole, as if testing its strength. Then with slow, calculated movements, she began pushing at the ice, breaking it away in larger chunks, widening the hole, but also giving Mike a flatter, more stable surface to grip. Mike's frozen mind struggled to process what was happening. This wasn't aggression. This wasn't play. This was help. The realization hit him like a second wave of cold. Driven by a surge of adrenaline, Mike fought with renewed determination. Using the new surface the bear had exposed, he dug his elbows into the edge and managed to lift his chest out of the water. It felt like lifting the weight of the world. His legs, numb and useless, dragged behind him as he clawed at the snow with trembling fingers. The bear didn't back away. She stayed close, her breath heavy and visible in the air between them. Occasionally, she nudged the ice, widening the space even more. Her cubs, still a safe distance away, began to whimper softly, but the mother remained focused on the human gasping for life in front of her. Mike's jacket tore at the seams as he struggled upward. With one last burst of strength, he heaved his entire body out of the water and onto the ice-covered ground. His chest convulsed as he coughed up the bitter, metallic-tasting water. His vision blurred, but before he collapsed completely, he caught one final glimpse of the bear. She stood tall, looking at him with an expression that Mike could only describe later as understanding. And then, without warning, she turned. Slow, majestic and calm, she lumbered back towards her cubs, stopping briefly to glance over her shoulder, as if checking one last time that he was out of danger. The wind picked up again, swirling snow around her retreating form, until she and her cubs disappeared into the white wilderness. Mike lay there, his body shaking uncontrollably, barely able to breathe. The edges of his consciousness flickered like a dying flame. But deep inside, something stronger than the cold, stronger than the fear, kept him tethered to life. That bear. That impossible, incredible bear. As the minutes passed, Mike realized he couldn't stay there much longer. The risk of freezing to death on the shore was as real as drowning had been moments earlier. Summoning what little energy he had left, he began crawling, inch by agonizing inch, towards the tree line, where he hoped to find shelter from the wind. His mind replayed the scene over and over, unable to comprehend it fully. Was it real? Had he imagined it? The weight of the experience pressed on him as heavily as the cold. He dragged himself behind a fallen log, curling into a ball, trying to shield his body from the cutting wind. His soaked clothes froze against his skin almost immediately. Every part of him ached. The world faded into a haze of white and gray. But just before he lost consciousness, he thought of something he hadn't done in months. He whispered, "Thank you." Then, darkness. Darkness wrapped around him like a thick, suffocating blanket. Time became meaningless. Minutes, maybe hours, slipped by as Mike drifted in and out of consciousness. The cold was no longer an external force, it was inside him now, running through his veins like ice water, slowing everything down, numbing both body and mind. At some point, he became vaguely aware of a sound cutting through the howling wind. A distant crunch of footsteps in the snow. Slow at first, then faster, closer. Human voices, shouting, faint, but growing stronger. Tom. It had to be Tom. Mike's mind struggled to focus. He wanted to call out, to scream for help, but all that escaped his frozen lips was a faint, broken whisper. His body wouldn't respond. It lay heavy and useless, like it belonged to someone else. Suddenly, warm hands grabbed his shoulders, shaking him gently at first, then more urgently. Someone shouted directly into his ear. "Mike, Mike, can you hear me? Stay with us, buddy." The words reached him like echoes from underwater. The next sensation was the unmistakable sting of a thermal blanket being wrapped around him, the rough fabric scratching against his frozen skin. They lifted him, carried him. Every jolt sent new waves of pain shooting through his limbs. But deep inside, beneath layers of cold and confusion, something flickered. Relief. The warmth of Tom's cabin was a distant dream as they rushed him inside, placing him near the stove, rubbing his hands and feet, trying to coax life back into his frozen body. Someone poured warm broth between his cracked lips. The taste was salty, metallic, but it was life. For hours they worked on him. Layers of wet clothing peeled away, socks cut from frostbitten feet, heated towels pressed to his chest and neck. The pain returned with brutal force as circulation slowly restarted. Pins and needles stabbed him over and over, like a punishment for surviving. As the night stretched on, the storm outside intensified. The walls shook with the wind's fury. Snow piled against the door, trapping everyone inside. Tom sat nearby, never leaving his side, occasionally checking his pulse, offering short words of encouragement. And through all this, the memory of the bear haunted him. Images replayed endlessly in his mind. The massive figure standing on the ice, the way she'd used her paw to break the surface, the look in her eyes. Rationality told him it was shock, hallucination, a trick of the mind born from hypothermia and fear. But his heart, it knew better. Tom noticed his restless state and sat down closer. "You're lucky," he said, handing Mike another cup of warm tea. "If we'd been just 30 minutes later, well, let's not think about that." Mike managed a weak nod. His voice cracked as he whispered, "The bear." Tom frowned. "Bear? You saw one out there?" Mike closed his eyes, the memory vivid and surreal. "She helped me." Silence filled the room. The only sounds were the crackling of the fire and the distant howl of the wind. Tom, a seasoned woodsman who had spent his life in the Alaskan wilderness, didn't laugh. He didn't scoff. Instead, he placed a firm hand on Mike's shoulder and simply said, "You've been through something most people wouldn't survive. Rest now. We'll talk in the morning." That night, sleep came in fragments. Nightmares mingled with memories. He dreamed of the bear again. Only this time she spoke, her voice low and wise, telling him to hold on, to fight. He woke several times, gasping for air, drenched in sweat despite the cold that lingered in his bones. By morning, the storm began to break. Weak sunlight pushed through the heavy clouds, casting a soft golden hue across the snow. Tom prepared the snowmobile, determined to get Mike to the nearest clinic as soon as the roads became passable. Wrapped in heavy blankets, Mike sat near the window, staring out at the endless white. The lake was hidden beyond the trees, but he couldn't shake the image from his mind. The bear, the look in her eyes, the deliberate way she had moved. His heart beat faster just thinking about it. Before Tom finished loading the gear, Mike scribbled a note with shaky hands, leaving it on the table for himself to read later. It said only 3 words: "Go find her." Later that day, after hours of grueling travel, Mike arrived at the small clinic in Nome. Nurses checked his vitals. A doctor examined his frostbite. They pumped him with warm fluids, monitored his breathing, and wrapped his damaged extremities. But even surrounded by machines and human care, his mind was back at the lake. Lying in the hospital bed that night, staring at the ceiling tiles, a single question burned in his mind. Was this some kind of miracle? Had nature, against all odds, shown him compassion? And now, let me ask you, where in the world are you watching this story from? Let us know in the comments below. We want to know how far this story has reached. Whether you're watching from a cozy home or somewhere as cold as Alaska, your voice matters. We're building a community here where incredible stories like this one are shared, remembered, and cherished. So, tell us, from which part of the world are you joining us? Because the next part of this story gets even more unbelievable. Days passed, but the image of the bear lingered in Mike's mind like an unfinished story screaming for resolution. The doctors advised him to stay in Nome for at least 2 weeks to recover fully. But Mike's heart grew restless. Every time he closed his eyes, he could see her, Sura, though he hadn't given her that name yet. It felt like the right name, though, inspired by a story an elderly Inuit woman once told him about a star guiding lost travelers home. Mike asked locals about recent bear sightings near the lake. Some shrugged it off. Others warned him not to go back so soon. "You're lucky to be alive, Mike," one said. "Don't go tempting fate again." But deep down, he knew he had to return. Not just to face what happened, but to understand it. When he finally stepped outside the clinic, the air was biting cold, but there was clarity in the sky. No more storm clouds. The snow crunched beneath his borrowed boots with each determined step. Tom lent him a small snowmobile and helped him gear up with extra thermal layers. Before Mike left, Tom pulled him aside. "Whatever you think happened out there, just be careful. Bears are unpredictable. Don't expect kindness twice." The ride back to his cabin was long and harsh. The icy wind cut through his layers like knives, but Mike pressed forward, driven by something stronger than physical discomfort. As he approached the familiar tree line near his cabin, his heart raced. The lake stretched ahead, still partially frozen, its surface a deceptive mirror of peace. Mike stood at the spot where the ice had broken days before. The hole was now sealed with fresh layers of thin, dangerous ice. The memory of cold water pulling him under flashed like lightning in his mind. He shivered, but this time it wasn't from the temperature. He scanned the area, looking for any signs, tracks, broken branches, disturbances in the snow. Hours passed with nothing but the distant cry of a raven overhead. Frustration mixed with doubt. Was it all just a hallucination? A figment of a dying mind? Just as he turned to leave, a sound froze him in place. A low, rolling growl, not threatening but deep and unmistakable. Mike's heart stopped. He turned slowly, and there she was. Emerging from the trees like a shadow come to life, Sura stood tall at the forest's edge. Her massive frame contrasted against the whiteness of the snow. The 2 cubs lingered behind her, growing noticeably bigger in just the short time since Mike had last seen them. For a long moment, neither moved. Mike's breath clouded the air in front of him as he tried to control the surge of emotions welling inside. Part of him wanted to run, but his legs remained rooted. Sura tilted her head again, studying him with those same dark, intelligent eyes. She took a slow step forward. Mike raised his hands instinctively, signaling peace, his voice trembling as he spoke. "It's okay. I'm not here to hurt you." The bear paused, then continued her slow, deliberate approach. Each step left deep impressions in the snow. Her cubs whimpered softly but stayed put, obeying their mother's silent command. Mike noticed something different this time. There was no fear in her movements, no signs of aggression. Her breathing was calm, her body relaxed, her ears pointed but not flattened in warning. She stopped about 10 feet from him. Memories of the lake came flooding back. The way she'd nudged the ice, the gentle push that had given him the chance to survive. Mike's throat tightened. How do you thank a bear? What gesture could possibly repay what she had done? Suddenly, Sura lowered her head, almost as if bowing. She sniffed the ground, then looked up again. Her gaze held his for what felt like an eternity. Mike's heart pounded wildly in his chest. Slowly, cautiously, he knelt in the snow, lowering himself to her level, not as a threat, but as a sign of vulnerability, of trust. For several heartbeats, neither of them moved. Then without warning, Sura turned. With one last glance over her shoulder, she began walking back into the forest. Her cubs quickly followed, but something was different this time. She didn't run, she didn't disappear in haste. Instead, she walked with deliberate slowness, pausing every few feet as if inviting him to follow. Mike hesitated. Was this a trap? A misunderstanding of animal behavior? Every survival instinct screamed at him to stay put. But something deeper pulled at him. A connection he couldn't explain. Step by step, he followed her. Through dense trees, over snow-laden paths, across frozen streams, deeper and deeper into the wilderness. The journey felt surreal, like stepping into another world untouched by human hands. Eventually, Sura led him to a small clearing nestled between ancient pines. There, protected by natural rock formations and thick underbrush, Mike saw what she wanted to show him. A den. Fresh tracks surrounded the entrance. Broken branches and disturbed snow told the story of their recent movements. But what struck Mike most was the sight of the cubs curling up inside, safe and warm, their tiny bodies rising and falling with each sleepy breath. Sura stood watch at the entrance, her posture proud and maternal. She turned to face Mike one final time, her expression unreadable but somehow filled with meaning. Mike stood there in awe, his breath catching in his throat. The realization hit him with overwhelming clarity. This wasn't just about survival. This was about trust, about connection, about an unspoken understanding between two beings from different worlds, brought together by fate. His eyes welled up with tears, not from the cold, but from gratitude. For the first time in years, he felt something stir inside him. Hope, healing, a sense of belonging not just to a place, but to something greater than himself. As the sun began to set, casting long golden rays across the snow, Mike turned to leave, giving the family their space. But before he disappeared into the trees, he whispered aloud, "Thank you, Sura. Thank you for everything." And with that, he made his way back to his cabin, heart full, knowing this chapter of his life had changed him forever. The next morning, the air was still and bitterly cold, the kind of cold that freezes breath mid-air and turns eyelashes into icicles within minutes. Mike woke with a start, heart pounding, replaying every detail of the previous day in his mind. The image of Sura standing at the entrance of her den, watching him with eyes that seemed to hold ancient wisdom, stayed burned into his memory. But something felt unfinished. As he pulled on his layers of clothing, wrapping scarves tightly around his face, a gnawing sensation grew in his chest. What if she came back? What if there was more she wanted to show him? Driven by instinct, Mike grabbed his old camera, the one that had captured so many Alaskan sunrises, and stepped outside. The snow crunched under his boots, each step measured and slow. The trail Sura had led him down the day before was still visible, faint impressions marking her path. Mike followed the tracks, moving deeper into the forest. The journey felt different this time, less like survival, more like pilgrimage. As he neared the clearing where her den sat, he noticed something unusual. The air smelled different, sharp and metallic. And then, silence. Even the birds had vanished. A low, guttural sound broke the stillness. Mike froze. Emerging from the trees, a second bear appeared, much larger than Sura. A male. His coat was darker, his shoulders broader. This was no passive observer. This was a territorial adult male, drawn perhaps by the scent of the cubs or by Mike's own intrusion into this wilderness. Mike's breath caught in his throat. He knew enough about bear behavior to recognize the warning signs: the rigid posture, the forward-pointing ears, the deep growl vibrating through the air like distant thunder. Backing away slowly, Mike kept his eyes low, trying not to provoke. But each step seemed to agitate the bear further. The massive animal lowered its head and took a step forward, teeth bared. Panic surged. Mike's heart slammed against his ribs. He looked around desperately for an escape, but the snow was deep and the trees were dense. Suddenly, movement to his left. Sura. She emerged from the shadows like a guardian summoned at the last second, her body positioned protectively between Mike and the advancing male. The cub stayed hidden inside the den, safe for now. What followed next was a primal, breathtaking display of raw, maternal instinct. Sura stood tall on her hind legs, towering even higher than the male. She let out a deafening roar, loud enough to make the ground beneath Mike's feet tremble. Her ears flattened, teeth bared, every muscle in her body tensed for battle. The male hesitated but didn't back down. He charged forward with shocking speed, closing the distance between them in seconds. Sura met him head-on, crashing into him with a force that sent snow exploding into the air. Mike stumbled backward, heart racing as the two bears engaged in a terrifying dance of survival and dominance. Powerful swipes, growls, and snapping jaws filled the air. The sound was like rolling thunder and breaking trees all at once. Every instinct in Mike screamed for him to run, but his legs wouldn't obey. Frozen, not by cold this time, but by awe and fear. Sura fought with everything she had, defending her territory, her cubs, and somehow Mike too. The larger male managed to pin her briefly, but with one powerful twist, she broke free, sinking her teeth into his shoulder. The male let out a tortured roar, and after a final aggressive swipe, turned and retreated into the woods, leaving a trail of disturbed snow and broken branches behind him. Silence returned just as quickly as it had been broken. Mike remained crouched low, struggling to process what he had just witnessed. Sura, blood streaking through her thick fur from a gash on her side, turned her gaze toward him. There was no aggression in her eyes, only exhaustion and something else. Recognition. Slowly, carefully, she approached him. Mike's entire body tensed, unsure what to expect. But she didn't threaten. Instead, she stopped just feet away, sniffed the air, and let out a soft, almost mournful huff. Mike whispered, his voice barely audible, "You saved me." Again. They stood there, predator and prey, protector and protected, human and beast, sharing a moment that defied explanation. Mike's mind reeled. The rational part of him knew this was against every survival rule he had ever learned. Approaching a wounded bear, staying within reach of her powerful jaws, madness. But the emotional part, the part connected to something far older than logic, told him to stay still. Sura turned and limped back toward her den. The cubs peeked out briefly, their small faces full of concern but relief at seeing their mother return. Mike, overwhelmed, finally found the strength to stand. His legs shook violently, but he remained upright. As he watched Sura disappear into the shadows, a surge of emotion overwhelmed him. Gratitude, humility, astonishment. Fumbling with frozen fingers, he raised his camera, capturing one final image. The blurred silhouette of the bear and her cubs retreating into the snowy forest, framed by soft light breaking through the clouds. As the camera shutter clicked, Mike realized that he had witnessed something that few, if any, humans ever would. Not just a rescue, but a bond, an unspoken connection that crossed species, language, and instinct. The adrenaline faded, replaced by a deep, aching fatigue. Mike knew he had to get back to his cabin before nightfall, but this time each step he took away from the den felt different, as though he was leaving behind more than just a clearing in the woods. He was leaving behind a part of himself. By the time he reached his cabin, the first stars had begun to appear in the Alaskan sky. The auroras stretched faint ribbons of green and purple across the horizon. Sitting on his porch, wrapped in every blanket he owned, Mike reviewed the photos on his camera. Every image brought the story back to life. The icy lake, the impossible rescue, the territorial battle, the connection. And though he was still cold, still sore, and still questioning reality, for the first time in a long while, Mike smiled. The wilderness hadn't taken him. It had saved him. Twice. That night, as Mike sat wrapped in layers of blankets near his fireplace, the full weight of what had happened began to settle in. The crackle of burning wood filled the cabin, but even the comforting sound couldn't quiet his racing mind. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her. Sura. The look in her eyes. The strength in her body. The instinct that had driven her to protect him. Not once, but twice. Outside, the wind howled against the wooden walls, but inside, Mike felt a strange sense of peace. The kind of peace that only comes after standing face to face with death and being given a second chance at life. He reached for his journal, a leather-bound notebook he hadn't written in for months. With trembling hands, he began to document every detail, the cold water pulling him under, the sensation of slipping into darkness, and then the impossible warmth of that giant paw breaking the ice, nudging him toward life. Words flowed like a river, raw and unfiltered. He wrote about the fear, the confusion, and the overwhelming gratitude. About the way she stood between him and the larger male bear, risking her own life. About the understanding that had passed between them without a single word. Halfway through writing, he paused, staring at the fire, lost in thought. Why? Why had she done it? Every survival guide Mike had ever read said bears were unpredictable, dangerous, driven only by hunger and instinct. But Sura had shown something else, something deeper, something human. Days passed, and with each sunrise, Mike's body grew stronger, though his frostbitten toes remained tender and his hands shaky. Yet his heart felt lighter. The fear that had haunted him for years, fear of failure, of loneliness, of insignificance, had melted away like snow under morning sun. One afternoon, as he stood near the edge of the forest collecting firewood, he saw movement out of the corner of his eye. His heart leapt. There she was, Sura, alone this time, her cubs likely safe in the den. Mike froze, not out of fear, but out of reverence. He didn't move closer. He didn't raise his camera. He simply stood, letting her presence wash over him like a wave. She watched him for a moment, then lowered her head to sniff the snow. Slowly, she began to walk along the tree line, not directly toward him, but close enough for their eyes to meet again. For a fleeting second, it felt like she acknowledged him, recognized him. Mike whispered softly, "Thank you." Sura paused, as if hearing him, then continued on her way, disappearing into the trees as gracefully as she had come. That night, Mike couldn't sleep. The emotional weight of the encounter pulled at him. He sat outside, wrapped in furs, gazing up at the stars scattered across the inky sky. The auroras danced faintly, ribbons of green flickering at the horizon. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel alone. The wilderness, once a place of danger and isolation, now felt like home. Each tree, each snowdrift, each howl of distant wolves seemed to sing a song of survival and connection. The boundaries between human and animal, between fear and trust, had blurred. Mike thought back to the name he had given her. Sura, star. Fitting, he thought. She had been his guiding light when everything else seemed lost. As the fire crackled beside him, Mike made a silent promise to himself. He would protect this land, this wilderness, and every creature that called it home, especially her. He pulled his journal close and began to write again, ending the entry with words that came straight from his heart. Sometimes, salvation comes with fur, fangs, and the heart of a mother. With that, Mike closed the book, smiled to himself, and let sleep take him under a sky full of stars. Spring arrived slowly in Nome, Alaska. The snow began to melt, revealing patches of brown earth beneath. Icicles dripped from cabin rooftops, and the frozen lake began to crack and groan under the weight of the changing season. Mike stood on his porch, breathing in the crisp air, feeling the warmth of the sun on his face for the first time in months. His body was still healing, but the bruises had faded, and the feeling in his hands and feet had mostly returned. The scars on his soul, however, felt like they were turning into something else, something stronger. Every morning, Mike found himself looking toward the tree line, wondering if Sura and her cubs were watching him from the shadows. Though he hadn't seen her since that last encounter, her presence lingered everywhere. In the broken branches near the clearing, in the distant tracks that occasionally appeared near the lake's edge, in the faint echoes of her growls carried by the wind late at night. The experience had changed him. Before that winter, Mike had viewed the wilderness as a challenge to conquer, a test of human endurance. But now, he saw it as a partner, a living, breathing force that gave and took in equal measure. One afternoon, he grabbed his camera and set off towards the lake, driven by the urge to capture the landscape that had become the backdrop of his survival story. The ice on the water had mostly broken apart, revealing dark, cold depths beneath. Standing at the same spot where he had once fallen through, Mike felt a chill, not from the cold but from the memory. He knelt beside the shore, running his fingers through the icy water. Closing his eyes, he let the sounds of the forest fill his ears, the rustle of branches, the call of distant birds, the trickle of melting snow. Life was returning to the land. For the first time, he spoke aloud, even though no one was there to hear him. "I'm still here," he whispered. "Thanks to you." Over the following weeks, Mike dedicated himself to learning more about bear behavior. He read books, spoke with local wildlife experts, and even contacted researchers studying bear-human interactions. None of them had an explanation for what had happened. Most shook their heads, offering cautious skepticism. But Mike didn't need scientific validation. He had lived it. Driven by a new sense of purpose, he began writing a full account of his experience. Pages turned into chapters, chapters into a manuscript. The story wasn't just about survival. It was about compassion, instinct, and the invisible threads that connect all living beings. He titled the book simply, "The Bear That Saved Me." Word spread through Nome. Locals who had once doubted him now listened with quiet awe when he told the story by the fire at the local tavern. Some shared their own tales of mysterious animal encounters. Others simply sat in silence, letting the weight of Mike's words settle deep in their hearts. On the first warm day of May, Mike took one final walk to the clearing. The den entrance was empty now. Sura and her cubs had moved on, likely farther north, following the pull of instinct and the promise of new hunting grounds. Standing at the edge of the forest, Mike smiled, lifting his camera one last time to capture the golden light spilling through the trees. As he lowered the lens, a final thought crossed his mind. Clear, certain, and filled with gratitude. "Wherever you are, Sura, thank you." And with that, he turned toward home, ready for whatever life and the wilderness would bring next. Sitting once again on his cabin porch, with the evening sun casting long shadows across the snow, Mike let his thoughts drift back over everything that had happened. The icy lake, the drowning, the impossible rescue, the battle between two powerful bears, and above all, the connection that had formed between him and Sura, a bond that defied explanation, logic, and even the natural order. He thought about how close he had come to dying, how just days before the accident, he'd taken the wilderness for granted, believing he understood its rules. Stay prepared, stay alert, don't take risks. But none of those lessons had prepared him for what unfolded. Mike realized something else, something deeper than survival instinct. Life wasn't about control. It wasn't about conquering nature or outsmarting danger. It was about connection, about understanding that sometimes help comes from the most unexpected places, in the most unimaginable forms. He wondered how many other moments in life he had missed because he was too busy thinking like a survivor and not enough like a human being willing to trust. For years, he'd built walls around himself, emotional, physical, mental walls. The wilderness had been both his refuge and his barrier from the world, but now those walls felt thinner, more fragile, and in that vulnerability, he found something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Mike took a deep breath, letting the cold air fill his lungs. The forest in front of him stretched endlessly, a sea of white and green. Somewhere out there, Sura was teaching her cubs how to survive, how to hunt, how to read the wind and smell the snow. She was teaching them strength, just as she had shown it to him. For the first time in his life, Mike didn't feel alone out here. The wilderness wasn't just trees and snow and predators anymore. It was family. It was life. It was part of him. He reached for his camera, capturing one last image of the horizon where the sun met the snow-covered peaks. The picture wasn't for anyone else. It was for him. A reminder, a memory, a promise. As he stood to go back inside, he smiled, whispering softly into the air. Sometimes survival isn't about fighting nature. It's about listening to it. And with that, Mike stepped inside, closing the door gently behind him, leaving the cold, but never the memory. If this story moved you even a little, if at any point your heart raced, your breath caught, or your eyes welled up with emotion, then you already know that what happened between Mike and that bear was something truly extraordinary. But let me tell you something even more important. Stories like this, they're not just meant to be watched and forgotten. They're meant to remind us of something we often lose in our busy lives, that we're all connected, that out there, in the coldest, most isolated corners of the world, moments of compassion happen, acts of bravery unfold, and sometimes miracles wear fur and walk on four legs. Mike's story is one of survival, yes, but it's also a story about trust, about instinct, and about the silent promises that nature makes to those willing to listen. And now, it's your turn to decide what happens next. If you felt a connection to this story, if you believe that stories like this deserve to be told, to be heard, and to be remembered, then now is the perfect time to become part of this journey with us. Right now, below this video, there's a red button that says, subscribe. And clicking that button does more than just add another channel to your YouTube list. It makes you part of a growing community of people who care about stories that matter. People who believe in the power of connection between humans and animals. People who understand that sometimes, the most unbelievable moments happen when we least expect them. So go ahead, take a second, click that subscribe button. And if you want to make sure you never miss another story like this, go one step further and hit that notification bell. Because the next story we're going to share, well, let's just say it's one you absolutely don't want to miss. In fact, it's already queued up and waiting for you. You don't even have to search for it. Right now on your screen, you'll see a thumbnail for our next video. And trust me, what happens in that story is just as incredible, just as heart-pounding, and just as emotional as what you've just experienced. Because when it comes to the wild heart connection, the stories never stop. Every week we bring you real moments like this, stories of survival, connection, and the kind of heart-stopping encounters that remind us why life is beautiful and unpredictable. So don't let this moment slip away. Click on that next video. Dive deeper into the world of extraordinary animal rescues and human-animal connections. And if you've made it this far in the video, if you stayed with us through every second of this journey, from the first crack of ice on that lake to the final, grateful breath Mike took on his porch, then I want to say something directly to you. Thank you. Your time is valuable, and the fact that you chose to spend it with us, experiencing this story, means more than you know. We're building something special here, a place where stories like Mike's aren't just told. They're felt, remembered, shared, and your voice is part of that. So before you click away, leave us a comment below. Tell us how this story made you feel. Did it remind you of something? Did it change the way you see wildlife? Did it make you believe, just a little more, in the unexpected kindness that can exist in the world? We read every comment. We reply whenever we can. Because this isn't just our channel, it's yours too. So let's keep this connection alive. Click subscribe, hit that bell, watch the next video now. Because with every story we share, and every story you watch, the wild heart connection grows stronger. We'll see you in the next one.